Okay, for my last discussion, I would like to discuss Lord Byron. He is probably the most famous of the Romantic poets, although today most critics consider him his poetry to be inferior to all of the other poets that I have mentioned. However, the legend and legacy of Lord Byron is something that is still with us today, and Lord Byron remains for me a personal favorite poet as well as a character. Lord Byron is interesting. Lord Byron is, of course, grouped with the Romantic poets, but in many ways he was a rebel. He was the most aristocratic of all of the poets that I have mentioned. Um, Lord Byron had tremendous wealth, and he kind of despised Wordsworth and Coleridge, and he mocked them in many of his writings. He believed the idea of writing in a poetic diction, understandable to the common man, would degrade and debase poetry. And Lord Byron often wrote satires. I believe the famous one is Scottish bards and English bards and Scottish reviewers, in which he would mock many aspects of the Romantic movement. This is why in earlier videos I mentioned that it's very difficult to generalize the Romantic movement because in many ways, due to the celebration of personality and individual talent, which characterizes the Romantic movement, you really have to understand the personalities and poetic approaches of each individual poet rather than seek any kind of broad brushstroke to characterize them all. So I'm going to talk about a few important aspects of Lord Byron's poetry, as well as the myth of Lord Byron, which came to dominate his age, and we still see shades of Lord Byron in literature and movies and art today. Lord Byron is probably most famous for creating a certain kind of hero. It's known today as, it's named after him eponymously, the Byronic hero. For the Romantics, they celebrated individuals who overstepped their boundaries. They celebrated great individuals who suffered for their greatness. So for the Romantics, figures like Prometheus, who stole fire from Zeus in order to help humans, but Prometheus was punished, chained to the Caucasus to have an eagle chew out his liver every day. He was celebrated as someone who violated the rules of the gods for a greater purpose and suffered for it. We see Romantic writers frequently celebrate Paradise Lost, and it's not God or Jesus that they celebrate, but Satan. Blake would famously write that Milton, being a poet, was of Satan's party, but did not know it. So these larger-than-life figures who challenged authority, these rebels, became heroes in the imaginations of many Romantics. Of course, to the neoclassical mindset, this is appalling. These people violated tradition, and they brought anarchy on the world, and they experienced great emotional suffering that they brought upon themselves and upon other people. And this lack of moderation, displayed by figures such as Prometheus and, of course, Satan, is something to the neoclassical mind to be abhorred, but to Romantic mindsets, it is something to be celebrated. To define a Byronic hero, you see Byronic heroes today in literature and movies. There's a famous quote by someone who knew Lord Byron, who said he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. You can think of the kind of out of control, crazy, aristocrat kind of character. They're usually an anti-hero, rebellious, arrogant, antisocial. Usually they are in exile. They've somehow lost favor with their family or with their country. Lord Byron's biography is fascinating. he was chased out of England because it was rumored that he was having an affair with his half sister, and there are references to this in his poetry, and he always felt this sense of exile and this sense that he was a great man who could not be appreciated by his times. Romantic heroes are dark. They're romantic. You can think of Rochester in Jane Eyre or Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, both by the Bronte sisters. In the novel of the time, these are prime representations of a Byronic hero. These dark, exiled, aristocratic figures who are almost too intelligent or too noble for the common man, and they suffer for their greatness. Byron explores this motif of the Byronic hero in much of his poetry. And many writers consider Lord Byron to be one of the first celebrities. Today in Greece, he is still remembered as a national hero. Lord Byron would die from dysentery that he contracted while fighting for Greek independence. And Lord Byron became a kind of larger-than-life figure. And in many ways, it is the shadow of Lord Byron that people remember best. So anytime that you watch a movie with a dark, enticing lead protagonist with a difficult inner secret, which is preoccupying his mind and makes him antisocial, but somehow irresistible to women, you can thank Lord Byron for popularizing this trope. To illustrate the Byronic hero, I often like to use a closet drama, a play, but really not made to be performed, written by Lord Byron called Manfred. In this play, it dramatizes the life and death of a historical figure named Manfred. Historically, Manfred was the son of Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire. Frederick II was called the Wonder of the World. He tried to start his own religion. He fought decades of wars with the Pope. He's a very fascinating historical figure, but ultimately he was overthrown and defeated by the Catholic Church and allies of the Catholic Church. And Manfred was his son. Manfred ultimately did not rule very long, and he faded into history. However, Lord Byron and later Thomas Mann would take up this figure and explore and create a lot of fictions about it. What's important to understand about Manfred is, in a way, how it sort of rewrites man's relationship with God and man's relationship with other men. So I wanted to discuss, in relationship with the Byronic hero, the final scenes of Manfred. Before I do this, I want to mention a little bit about the Faust legend. We see Goethe write about Faust later. Christopher Marlowe wrote a famous play about Faust around the time of Shakespeare. Faust is a figure from German history. He seems to be a historical person, but of course many myths gathered about him. The basic idea was that Faust was dissatisfied with life and that he made a pact with the devil in order to achieve magical powers so that he could experience the joys of the world. It's a traditional tale of a man who sells his soul for power and for pleasure. We see in Marlowe and in Goethe that when Faust is called by the devil to hell, he repents. And in Faust, God accepts this repentance, and it is kind of a sign of God's ultimate redeeming power, that even someone so despicable as to sell their soul to Satan can be redeemed through repentance and through an intense love of God. The Byronic hero and Manfred, however, have a different view. So when the devils come to take Manfred to hell. He says this to them. My life is in its last hour, that I know, nor would redeem a moment of that hour. I do not combat against death, but thee, and thy surrounding angels. My past power was purchased by no compact with thy crew, but by superior science, penance, daring, and length of watching, strength of mind and skill, and knowledge of our fathers when the earth saw men and spirits walking side by side, and gave ye no supremacy. I stand upon my strength. I do defy, deny, spurn back, and scorn ye. Must crimes be punished but by other crimes and greater criminals? Back to thy hell. Thou hast no power upon me, that I feel. Thou never shalt possess me, that I know. What I have done is done. I bear within a torture which could nothing gain from thine. The mind, which is immortal, makes itself requital for its good or evil thoughts, is its own origin of ill and end, and its own place and time. So we see in the last moments of Manfred, he's making a stunning declaration of human independence, of human freedom, and of human free will. He's telling the devils that no torture that they can possibly concoct can compare to what he has done, that he has made his own life, and that he has nothing to fear. He has nothing to fear from them. He stands on his own. He is superior to the devils. He's superior to God. Manfred is a figure, a Promethean figure, a satanic figure, who is surrounded by injustice and stands above it. He's arrogant, he's haughty, but he's proud. And this pride, which in Satan and traditional moralists is something to be scorned, in Manfred is something that gives humans freedom and gives humans nobility. And you see this again and again with the Byronic hero trope. It's alluded that Manfred had an affair with a sister, Astarte. I believe they use the name of the Babylonian goddess in this regard, or Byron does. And so you see this trope of the Byronic hero. He transgresses traditional social bounds. He suffers exile and loneliness for it. He has immense powers and understanding of nature, of man, almost supernatural powers. But in the end, he does not humble himself. He remains proud, and until his last days, he will die, but he will die on his own terms, not on the terms of Satan, not on the terms of God. And this trope of the Byronic hero, this arrogant, proud, self-righteous, but deeply and darkly attractive figure, is still found in movies and literature today. Just look for it. Also with Lord Byron, Lord Byron's most famous poem is called Don Juan, is how he would have pronounced it. It's Don Juan, the famous Spanish-Austrian general. He was noted for Don Juan was noted for being a womanizer and for his many affairs with women. And it's an interesting poem. Of all the Romantic poets, Lord Byron is the most satirical. He loves to explore the follies of love and of relationships, and in Don Juan he finds the perfect figure to do this. We see a figure much like in his first famous poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, that travels the world and has amorous adventures and fights and meets kings and queens and things like this, but he is never satisfied. And that is another hallmark of the Byronic hero, someone who adventures and adventures and adventures, but is never satisfied. It's a little outside of our time, but a good poem to read as kind of criticism or a rebuke of the Byronic hero is Tennyson's Ulysses, in which Ulysses is this figure who must constantly explore. He is not happy living at home. He is not happy with the dull duties of being a king in Ithaca. And Tennyson kind of mutely criticizes him for not not staying in his proper sphere and not accepting happiness. And Lord Byron celebrates this. This idea of, I think it was another British poet, Matthew Arnold, was writing about Keats and this idea of going beyond the bourne. Beyond the bourne was like a fence, you can imagine, going beyond the bounds of human imagination and of human thought. So with the Byronic hero and a lot of poetry at the time and for the Romantic period, this idea of excess as being a reward in and of itself is important. And we see that clearly in Byron and in the Byronic hero.